Chapter 1. The First Letter. Sarah Moretti had always been skeptical about the supernatural, dismissing any notion of an afterlife as mere superstition. Her life was rooted in practicality, a job as a high-powered attorney in New York City and an apartment that overlooked the bustling streets below. She valued order, control, and the kind of logic that made sense of her hectic world. Until the morning she found the letter. It was a plain, cream-colored envelope without a return address. Her name, neatly written in an elegant cursive that seemed oddly familiar, was the only mark on its surface. She hesitated for a moment before opening it, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it a legal threat? A client in distress? But as she unfolded the paper, what she read sent a chill down her spine. Dear Sarah, I write to you from a place between, neither here nor there. Between life and death. Between light and shadow. You don't know me, but I know you. I know the secrets you've buried, the fears you refuse to face. And soon, you will have to confront them all. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reread the words. She laughed, a forced, nervous chuckle. This had to be a prank, someone playing on her cynicism, mocking her skepticism. She tossed the letter onto the coffee table, dismissing it as a bizarre joke. But as she turned away, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from an unknown number read, I see you found my letter. There will be more. Each will reveal a truth you wish to keep hidden. Are you ready? Her breath caught. She didn't recognize the number, and when she tried to call it back, there was nothing, just an automated message saying the number was not in service. Her logical mind scrambled for explanations, perhaps a stalker, maybe a disgruntled client, or even a cruel prank by a colleague. But in her gut, she knew this was something else, something far more sinister. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow more menacing. The letter lay open on her bedside table, its words echoing in her mind. She told herself it was nothing, just a trick of her own imagination. But deep down, Sarah knew this was only the beginning. Are you intrigued? Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and share to see the twists unravel. Chapter 2. The Unwelcome Visitor. The next morning, Sarah's routine was broken by a knock at her door, sharp and insistent. She peered through the peephole to see a man in his late 50s, wearing a black overcoat and a solemn expression. His eyes seemed to bore straight through the door, as if he already knew she was watching. Ms. Moretti? He asked, the words muffled but clear enough to carry a sense of urgency. My name is Detective Marcus Dean. I believe we need to talk. Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. What could this possibly be about? Was it connected to the letter she received? She opened the door slightly, enough to see his badge but not enough to invite him inside. Detective, she said cautiously, what is this about? He glanced down at the letter in her hand, his face tightening. It's about that letter you received, he replied. And it's not the first one, is it? She felt the ground shift beneath her feet. How do you know about the letter? May I come in? He asked, his tone softening but his eyes never losing their intensity. This isn't a conversation for the hallway. Reluctantly, she stepped aside, letting him enter her meticulously tidy apartment. He walked to the living room and paused, as if gauging the space for hidden threats. Sarah's nerves were fraying by the second. Ms. Moretti, he began, choosing his words carefully, I'm investigating a case involving a series of letters similar to the one you received. They all claim to be from someone who is, between worlds. And each one has led to the recipient's death. Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. Death? What are you saying? Are you telling me I'm in danger? Detective Dean nodded slowly. The people who received these letters all had secrets, deep, dark secrets that they thought were well hidden. And the letters revealed each secret in turn, pushing them to the brink. Whoever, or whatever, is sending these letters seems to know things that no living person should. Sarah's mind reeled. This has to be a sick joke. Someone is trying to mess with me, right? Dean locked eyes with her, his voice steady. I wish it were that simple. But every person who got one of those letters is now dead. The causes vary, accidents, suicides, unexplained disappearances, but the timing is too precise to be a coincidence. Sarah's gaze shifted to the letter on her table, its presence now like a dark shadow in her pristine living room. What secrets did she have that were so dangerous, so hidden, that someone would want to dig them up now? And more importantly, who could possibly know? How do we stop this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dean reached into his pocket, pulling out a small card with a number on it. We start by keeping you safe. If you receive another letter, if anything seems off, you call me immediately. And whatever you do, do not try to face this alone. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. One more thing, Ms. Moretti, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Whoever sent you that letter is watching. They know more about you than you realize. Be careful who you trust. Sarah stood alone in her apartment, the door closing with a heavy thud behind him. She could feel the walls closing in, the shadows lengthening around her. Her once predictable life had just spiraled into chaos, and the threat wasn't just out there, it was closing in, one secret at a time. Curious about what happens next? Hit subscribe and share to see Sarah's story unfold into the unknown. Chapter 3. The Unseen Eyes. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and anxious glances over her shoulder. Sarah's once orderly world was now punctuated by the constant fear of the unknown. Every time she stepped into her apartment, she half expected to find another letter waiting for her. Each shadow seemed to shift suspiciously, and the hum of the city outside felt like a whispered warning. Then, on the third evening after Detective Dean's visit, as Sarah returned home from a long day at the firm, she noticed something out of place. Her apartment door was slightly ajar, the lock hanging at an odd angle. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she hesitated, 100 scenarios racing through her mind. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Detective Dean's number. "Detective, it's Sarah," she said as soon as he answered. "Someone's been in my apartment. The door's been tampered with." "Stay where you are," he commanded, his voice sharp and urgent. "I'm on my way. Don't go inside." But as she stood there in the dim hallway, something compelled her to push the door open. The living room was eerily quiet, the shadows longer and darker than they should have been. And then she saw it, a single envelope placed neatly on her coffee table, identical to the first. This time, it was open, and the letter was already unfolded. With a sense of dread, Sarah approached the table and read the message. "Dear Sarah, I warned you, didn't I? Secrets have a way of revealing themselves, even when buried deep. You think you're safe, surrounded by the walls you've built so carefully. But I am already inside. Watching. Waiting. The truth will come out, and when it does, you won't be able to run from it." She backed away from the letter, her eyes darting around the room, searching for hidden cameras or any sign of intrusion. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, as if unseen eyes were tracking her every movement. Just then, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Detective Dean burst through the doorway moments later, his gun drawn and eyes scanning the room. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked, his tone all business. She nodded, pointing to the letter. "They were here. They left another letter. They know everything about me. How is that possible?" Dean's face turned grim as he carefully picked up the letter, his eyes narrowing at the words. "This changes everything," he said, almost to himself. "They're escalating. Whoever this is, they're not just playing games anymore, they're closing in on you." He turned to Sarah, his face a mask of determination. "We need to dig into your past, Ms. Moretti. Whatever it is you're hiding, whatever secrets you thought were buried, we need to bring them to light. It's the only way to get ahead of this." Sarah felt a surge of anger rise within her. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not hiding anything," she protested. But even as she spoke the words, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. There were things she had done, choices she had made in the darkest moments of her life, things she had locked away so deeply that even she rarely thought about them. Dean studied her, his eyes searching for any sign of deception. "Whoever this is knows you, Sarah. They know your past better than you know yourself. And until we uncover what they're after, you're not safe." Sarah's defenses crumbled as she realized the truth in his words. There was no logic or control that could save her from this nightmare, only the unraveling of secrets that she had fought so hard to keep hidden. And somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for her next move. Want to see Sarah confront her darkest fears? Subscribe and share to follow the suspense as the mystery deepens. Chapter 4. The Shadow of Betrayal. Sarah sat in her living room, Detective Dean pacing nearby, his brow furrowed in thought. The air between them was tense, thick with unspoken questions. For the first time in years, she felt like her life was slipping through her fingers. Control was no longer hers to hold. Sarah, Dean began, stopping in front of her. I need you to be honest with me. You said you're not hiding anything, but these letters, they imply otherwise. Think. Is there anything in your past that could be used against you? Anyone with a reason to do this? She stared at him, her mind scrambling for answers she didn't want to give. Flashes of memory darted through her mind, decisions she had made out of desperation, actions that, if revealed, could destroy everything she had built. But there was one event, one mistake, that stood out from the rest. A moment she had hoped to forget forever. There is one thing, she said reluctantly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Years ago, I was involved in a case, a personal case, not business. It was about my brother, Anthony. He disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Detective Dean's eyes sharpened, catching every nuance in her tone. Go on. Sarah hesitated, the words bitter in her mouth. Anthony was in trouble with the law, wrapped up with the wrong people. Drugs, money laundering, the works. I was young, desperate to protect him. So, I covered up some things, hid evidence to keep him from going to prison. But it didn't matter. He vanished one night, without a trace. Dean's expression softened, though his eyes remained calculating. And you think this might be connected to his disappearance? I don't know. Sarah burst out, the frustration cracking her composure. But whoever is sending these letters knows things about me that no one else should. If they know about Anthony, they could be using it to make me suffer, to punish me for trying to protect him. Before Dean could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen, her blood running cold as she saw another message from the unknown number. You think this is about your brother? Oh, Sarah, it's so much more than that. You betrayed someone far worse. She turned the phone to show Dean, who read the message, his jaw tightening. This isn't just about Anthony. They're playing with you, pushing you to the edge, he said. We need to get to the bottom of this, and fast. As they were speaking, a sudden knock came at the door. Both Sarah and Dean turned, tense and alert. Dean motioned for Sarah to stay back as he opened the door cautiously. Standing on the other side was a man Sarah had never seen before, tall, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. Sarah Moretti? The stranger asked, his voice cold and precise. I have a message for you. Dean reached for his weapon, but the man held up his hands, empty and unthreatening. Relax, detective. I'm just the messenger. He handed Sarah another envelope, this one sealed with a wax stamp in the shape of a broken circle. Your secrets are coming to light, he said, his gaze never leaving hers. All of them. You can't run from what's buried deep. And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night as suddenly as he had appeared. Sarah's hands trembled as she broke the seal on the envelope, pulling out the letter inside. Dear Sarah, you thought you could bury your past in the darkness, but the truth has a way of surfacing. I know about the lies, the betrayals, the sins you committed in the name of love and loyalty. One by one, they will come back to haunt you. And when they do, you'll realize that the person you feared most isn't out there. It's within. Sarah's vision blurred as she let the letter fall to the floor. She felt the walls closing in on her, the truth creeping in like a shadow she couldn't escape. Whoever was behind this knew not just about Anthony, but about everything she had tried to bury, every lie she had told to survive. And now, her past was clawing its way back to the surface, ready to consume her. Can't wait to uncover Sarah's buried secrets? Make sure to subscribe and share as the suspense reaches new heights. Chapter 5. The Return of Anthony. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Anthony's face, his smile twisted into an expression of accusation, his eyes filled with a haunting disappointment. Her brother had always been her weakness, the one person she would do anything to protect. But now, the fear that he was somehow tied to this sinister game was eating away at her. Morning brought no relief. The city outside her window seemed unchanged, indifferent to her turmoil. She stared at the latest letter, its words replaying in her mind like a relentless echo. You betrayed someone far worse. Who could they possibly mean? Who did she betray that was more dangerous than her brother's enemies? Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Meet me at Pier 27 tonight. Midnight. Come alone, or your secrets go public. Sarah's heart pounded. She knew she couldn't ignore this. Whoever was behind these letters was tightening their grip, pulling her deeper into their web. And if she didn't show up, there was no telling what they would do next. Detective Dean was adamantly against it when she told him. This is a trap, he said, his face set in a hard line. They want you isolated, vulnerable. There's no way I'm letting you go there alone. But Sarah was resolute. I have to do this, Dean, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. If I don't face this head on, they'll keep coming for me. And they won't stop until they destroy everything I have left. Reluctantly, Dean agreed to follow from a distance, promising to stay out of sight unless things got out of control. As the night drew closer, Sarah's anxiety twisted into a tight knot in her stomach. She knew that once she stepped onto that pier, there would be no turning back. The docks were empty when she arrived, the air thick with fog rolling in from the water. The sound of the waves lapping against the wooden posts was the only noise in the cold, quiet night. She stood there, alone, her breath visible in the chilly air, waiting. A shadow emerged from the mist, a tall figure walking toward her. As he came closer, the fog parted just enough to reveal his face, and Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Anthony, she whispered, her voice cracking. Is it really you? Her brother stood before her, older and harder than she remembered, but undeniably alive. His eyes, once full of mischief, now held a darkness that chilled her to the core. He looked at her with a mix of anger and something else, something like betrayal. You thought you could just let me disappear, didn't you? Anthony said, his voice cold and distant. You thought you could bury everything and walk away clean. Sarah's legs felt like they might give out beneath her. Anthony, I thought you were dead. I tried to find you, I tried to help. Help? He interrupted, laughing bitterly. You didn't help me. You helped yourself. You let them think I was gone, so you could cover up your own sins. You betrayed me to save your career, to save your perfect life. Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. No, that's not true. I did everything I could for you. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? Anthony echoed, his eyes narrowing. You were only protecting yourself. But don't worry, Sarah. This isn't just about you and me. There's someone else who wants to see you pay. Someone you wronged far worse than you did me. He stepped closer, his face inches from hers, the hatred in his eyes burning like ice. This is only the beginning, Sarah. You're going to lose everything you ever cared about, just like I did. And the person you betrayed the most? They're watching. They're closer than you think. Sarah's heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. Everything she had done to protect her brother had led to this moment, this twisted reunion in the fog. But now, it wasn't just Anthony she had to fear. There was another player in this deadly game, hidden in the shadows, pulling the strings. Don't miss the final revelations as Sarah's darkest secrets come to light. Subscribe and share to witness the climax of this haunting suspense. Chapter 6. The Final Revelation. The air around the pier seemed to freeze as Sarah stared at her brother, her mind struggling to process the reality of his presence. Anthony was alive, but he wasn't the brother she remembered. He was a stranger now, twisted by the darkness he had lived through. And whoever he was now, he was no longer on her side. Anthony, please, Sarah begged, her voice trembling. We can still fix this. Tell me who's behind all of this. Who have I betrayed? I need to know the truth. Anthony's face softened for a moment, a flicker of the brother she once knew flashing in his eyes. But just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by a cold, distant stare. You really don't know, do you? He said, almost pityingly. You don't remember what you did. What you took from them. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her mind was racing through memories, searching for the answer she so desperately needed. And then, like a cruel whisper from the past, it came back to her, a face she had long since buried in the depths of her memory. It was Emily Langston, her former best friend from college, the one whose trust she had shattered in the most unforgivable way. Sarah's betrayal had been the catalyst that destroyed Emily's life, unraveling her career, her relationships, everything. Emily had disappeared after that scandal, vanishing into obscurity while Sarah's own life flourished in the legal world. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "It's Emily, isn't it? She's the one behind all of this." Anthony gave a slow, approving nod. "There you go. Now you're starting to see the picture. Emily never forgot what you did to her, Sarah. She never forgave you for stealing her chance, her life. And now, she's made it her mission to tear yours apart piece by piece." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she struggled to breathe. "But how? Why are you involved in this, Anthony? Why would you help her? Why?" Anthony's eyes flared with a bitterness that seemed to cut through the fog. "Because Emily was the only one who found me when everyone else thought I was dead. She gave me a reason to survive when you abandoned me. We both have our scores to settle with you, Sarah." Before Sarah could react, a figure stepped out of the shadows behind Anthony. It was a woman, tall, composed, with a face that was both familiar and terrifying. Emily Langston herself, her expression unreadable, stood watching them with eyes that glinted with cold determination. "Hello, Sarah," Emily said, her voice smooth and emotionless. "It's been a long time." Sarah felt like the ground was falling away beneath her. "Emily, I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant for things to go the way they did. I was young, ambitious, I made terrible mistakes." Emily's lips curled into a thin smile. "Mistakes? You call ruining my life a mistake? You took everything from me, Sarah, and then you moved on like it never even mattered. But guess what? I didn't move on. I waited. I planned." She took a step closer, her gaze piercing through Sarah. "And now, it's my turn to take everything from you." Anthony reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small recording device, holding it up for Sarah to see. "This conversation is just the beginning, Sarah," he said. "Everything you say, every lie you try to tell, it's all being recorded. We're going to expose the truth about you to the world." Sarah's chest tightened with panic, her mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. "Emily, please," she pleaded. "We can find a way to make this right. There has to be another way." But Emily's face was set like stone. "There is no other way, Sarah. You took my life, my future. Now, I'm taking yours. And the best part is, you'll have no one to blame but yourself." Anthony gave her one last look, part anger, part disappointment, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of regret. Then, he turned and walked away, Emily by his side, disappearing into the darkness of the night. Sarah was left standing on the pier, the fog thickening around her, her past sins closing in like ghosts she could never outrun. The letters, the threats, the fear, it had all been leading to this moment. Her secrets were out, and the truth was finally catching up with her. And as she stood there, alone in the cold, empty night, Sarah realized that her greatest enemy had never been out there in the world. It had always been inside her, the choices she made, the betrayals she committed, and the haunting reality of what she had become. The end.